The Adobe Flash Player is finally ending its support this month. This truly marks an end of an era, and there's a bunch of things that I'd like to talk about regarding this. Hey guys, this is Toniko, and today I'd like to talk about classic Flash cartoons that actually got me into animation. So let me tell you guys, I wouldn't have ever gotten into animation if it weren't for Flash animations and cartoons from the mid-2000s. There was a charm to browsing around websites like Miniclips, Newgrounds, and other Flash portal websites. You could just watch an animated cartoon, a movie, or play a game in your browser made by Flash. Back then, there wasn't a popular video player online, and even when YouTube first came out, that was still powered by the Flash media player. So for those who don't know what Flash is, it's a format that allowed you to watch cartoons and games made in Flash on your browser. These were mostly made in a program called Flash, which is now currently known as Adobe Animate. Back then, Flash was a great multimedia platform for online browsing. But besides games and other multimedia, I want to focus more on the animation scene for Flash. Just like today, you get animated content such as parodies, original content, original stories, sprite animations, puppet animation. The only difference is it was way more underground back then, meaning that there was no big scene with social media, there was not really any sponsorship nor monetization. It was pretty much the Wild West when it came to web animation. Before, no one really knew exactly what they were doing, and honestly there was a charm to it because everyone was just kind of experimenting and discovering it on their own. So one example would be that teens would kind of discover the 12 principles of animation without actually knowing what they were, and they would come up with their own terminology for it. I remember arcs became the circle theory in some forums, or animating on 1s, 2s, and 3s, teens would translate that into single, double, or triple time animators. And that's what I really loved about the scene back then. A lot of people were kind of just experimenting and discovering things on their own. But nowadays, the information is all there. You would understand what the 12 principles of animation are, the process of filmmaking and animation, and just the amount of resources out there right now. Back then, we didn't really have that. And even if there was, that information was kind of scarce. But there's also something you need to know about Flash as acting as a bridge for my career. You see, I was aware with Disney Animation, Don Bluth, Pixar, the whole VFX world, Animate, and anything related to animation. But honestly, just those alone didn't make me want to pursue animation because in order to make animation or film, you need a big studio. But at Flash, it made that dream of making animation, cartoons, and telling stories through that medium more tangible and possible. So back then, I was thinking, wait, I could do that if I just had Flash on my Windows 2000? All you needed was a PC and Flash to make the cartoons that you can distribute online, and maybe a tablet. But a lot of people back then were animating with a mouse. There were young artists, older artists that were veterans, hobbyists, and professionals sharing their work within the community that was done in Flash. It's just the idea of making something based on a program's limitations. Just the sheer artist's skill and creativity surrounding it, and the community is what made me want to be part of that community. So what did a lot of Flash cartoons look like? Well, it looked puppetry, it looked cheap, and it looked very economic. And it was always paired with the stigma of being raunchy and crude, and in a way immature, but you know what? I enjoyed being part of that community too. But you know what? Time to time, there were just a few exceptions that pushed Flash to the point where it looked like a professional production, and it didn't look cheap, or it wasn't just made by some rando in their bedroom. But it probably was. There's a lot of Flash cartoons that I personally love, but I want to talk about the ones that really got me into wanting to learn animation as a career and learn more about the world of filmmaking. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the ones that really inspired me to learn animation. GENRYU'S Blade by Nelshin, that was made in I think 2000 or 2001, I can't remember, but it's within those 2 years, stars a former assassin who now has a bounty on his head hunted by other assassins. I didn't discover this gem through Newgrounds, but another website that is now defunct called Shock Anime, and it was a website dedicated to having other Flash animations resembling more high quality and anime style productions. Or judging from that website and the cartoons that it hosted back then, Flash that didn't look like generic Flash. Genryu'S blade at the time was highly cinematic and really well done in terms of the animation department while dealing with the program's limitations. This was done in Macromedia Flash 5, which is already a very limited version of Flash. But combined with some highly cinematic shots, it also had some great animation that you can tell was done with economic strategies such as reusing assets, early forms of symbol-based animation mixed with traditional style animation. From my understanding, this film was drawn with a mouse, whereas post-effects such as blurs were all done in Photoshop, and this was back when Flash didn't have blur effects or any of that matter. Basically, you took a screenshot of your film, import it into Photoshop, add in some post-effects, and import it back as a frame into your Flash animation. Back when the Shock Anime website existed, there was a making of and tutorials on how bits and pieces were done, how the characters were drawn, how the post-effects were done, and it was all very helpful. Even though there were some economic methods that were used to make this cartoon, it still took forever to load considering the internet back in 2001, and considering that I was watching this film back in Southeast Asia. I remember it would take close to an hour just to finish loading it, but Genryu'S blade is awesome and the violence is great, and considering that this was made back in 2001 or maybe earlier, this is a Flash animation at its highest achievement. Cigarette by Ed Scudder holds a high place in my heart. I have a lot to say about Ed Scudder because his animation, his work ethic, and his personality is what really influenced my overall work ethic and who I strive to be going into animation. Cigarette was the first Flash movie I saw from him, which was a music video for the Ben Folds 5 track, Cigarette. Now, this was the film that made me go, wait a second, that is done in Flash? You can do that in Flash? It had some great character animation that was fully hand-drawn 2D animation, some great cinematography, and great storytelling, and it felt like I was watching an actual short film that was made by some studio or a group. It showed me that you can get away with great atmosphere, lighting, tone, and expressions. And honestly, it was something I needed, especially with all the raunchy jokes and violence that was common during the Newgrounds days. Now this showed me that Flash is capable of more than just tweens and symbol-based animation, and at times it felt like it was done by Disney. I'm pretty sure Ed finished this film when he was about 17 or 18 years old, which back then is such an amazing feat. Back then, this was considered ferocious. Remember, there wasn't really a big online animation presence at the time. Even the works that he did before he was 17 or 18, still just super impressive considering the time. Also, there's something that I really need to talk about. Back then, doing hand-drawn animation was known as frame-by-frame or FBF animation, and back then, if you were one of the few people that could animate full-body animation where each frame or key is an entirely new drawing and that was consistent, you were considered an animation god back then. Anyways, back to Ed Scudder. Ever since then, he's pushed Flash into a quality program, making great animation work outside of it. His later work is still just as impressive, or even more impressive. Producing the well-animated Solstice with Lin Wang, and being one of the creators for Dick Figures. And knowing that he studied film, he went into film production rather than just animation, really made me interested in learning filmmaking. Now, the reason why I really look up to Ed is that he's also very nice and super supportive, and I wouldn't have gotten into animation if it wasn't for him. Seriously, when I was new, he was always encouraging when I reached out for help or some advice, and he always gave some really encouraging messages. In fact, I still keep all of his emails from almost over 12 years ago. Since then, he's always brought positive vibes. So Ed, if you by any chance see this video, thanks a bunch, man. Renegade by NANOKOSTUDIOS. Renegade was going to be a Flash series that starred a young girl looking for her brother in a desolate future, where there's a bigger force known as the Syndicate oppressing the people. This had everything I loved. Dramatic action storytelling with great mood and atmosphere, and it had an anime style. Sure, it was campy, but it was campy in a really good way. It had everything I loved about that genre of anime. It had some great pacing, editing, and overall taste, and great fight sequences back in the day. Sakuga-style animation wasn't really common back then. It's so common now to the point where it's kind of oversaturated, but back then, this was really new stuff. I remember this blew everyone back in the day. That was done in Flash? What? I like the character designs because the character designs themselves were economic, but it allowed for great expressions when it came to animation. So there's some great, smart design choices made for each drawing. Also, there were some great voice actors involved, including the legendary Lucian Dodge, who I also got to work with for the short film Wolfsong. It showed me that with the right music, the right actors, the right sensibilities, the direction, and animation style, you could turn Flash into this high-end feeling production. A lot of the music used was copyright, so it's stuff that I can't really show on YouTube. NANOKOSTUDIOS belonged to a niche forum called Joined Artists 2, which I joined later on, and it had people pushing Flash to its limits. And a lot of the users there were into the anime and Sakuga style, so they would try and replicate that feeling into Flash. I eventually joined Joined Artists 2 forum back in the day, but like a lot of niche groups with really talented people, there was a bit of an ego issue there, and there was a lot of drama and flame wars that started in that. If this was the only community I had when learning and wanting to go into animation, I would have just given up. It was that toxic. But if it weren't for people like SKUDDER and another individual I'll talk about sooner down the line in this video, I would have just left. But hey, 10 years later, I did reunite with some of those individuals, and we're all working in the same industry now. The Xiao Xiao series by Zhu, or is it Zhu? I'm not sure. Okay, so if you guys want to know where all that stick figure animation craze originated from, it came from the Xiao Xiao series. Now, I'm not entirely sure how Zhu animated the stick figure series, but there will be a time where there are 3D elements involved in 3D shots. This is quintessential Flash cartoon production. It's minimal, easy to load, and highly entertaining. Episode 3 is the big one. Episode 3 is where our main hero fights hundreds of stick figures all in one shot with great choreography and easy to look at art direction. The animation and choreography was so good and believable that to me and my elementary classmates thought if you were really good at Kung Fu, you too could do something like this. When I watched it again, I can't believe how stupid I was as an elementary kid. But one thing I don't regret is that watching this film, it did make me want to actually animate. And it made me want to animate stick figures. The Xiao Xiao series was made in the early 2000s. There are a lot of early 2000s references. There's a bunch of that Matrix slow-mo kick. Now, the Xiao Xiao series wasn't really episodic. Each episode was basically its own thing. Some of them were games, some of them were choose your own adventures, some of them were just shorts. And they never really connected with each other. The only thing that connected them was the art style, the kung fu, the stick figures, and that was it. But that iconic Flash animation stick figure look really came from something like this. The Zero Dragon series by DARELL Proctor. Okay, so Zero Dragon to me is a unique one to talk about because it had this very weird, uncanny yet appealing style where the humor was really dry, accompanied with these photorealistic faces slapped onto these really shoddily animated bodies. The whole thing focuses on a character named Billy Lowe. It's a kung fu story, but here's the kicker. The kung fu style these characters fight with is the Flash animation style.
You do Flash animations, right?
Yeah, and?
Hey, you suck at Flash. Excuse me?
Sorry. How you doing?
So there's a lot of Flash inside jokes such as the Newgrounds community, the Flash animation portal, tweening, frame by frame, and they're all personified as kung fu styles in this short.
Wanna see some Flash?
So the main character basically shamed his own kung fu school because his Flash animation got blamed on Newgrounds, which is basically another form of getting critically panned. The sense of humor is what inspired my own sense of humor. The dryness, it's sort of inspired by Stephen Chow, where it's sort of dry but it kind of just builds up. And watching these cartoons again accompanied with this uncanny style, it really holds a high appeal to my heart and I still find it really hilarious to this day. From my knowledge, this was animated with a mouse, but the heads were basically bitmap traced and vectorized into the Flash cartoons. So it's definitely a hidden gem because no one really talks about it, but it's something that I really enjoyed. I hope you guys can find the series because it is a great watch, especially if you totally understand the Flash community. Okay, Autumn Tree is done by a user named ALONENTHEDARK. Now this one wasn't really cinematic or had high-end production value as the others I mentioned, but ALONENTHEDARK is one of my favorite artists because he is so earnest and honest with his work. It's his storytelling that grasped me. Autumn Tree is a retelling of the Columbine shooting back in 1999. The pacing and storytelling was so good it didn't rely on cheap tactics or production value to show things like suspense and atmosphere. You just felt this omen building up. I remember watching this with my twin brother, and I remember he was breathing so heavily because of the suspense, even though there wasn't any like building up track. It was just that feeling that you got out of watching it. He made a short called GENRYU'S, which stars a scarecrow that goes on a journey and befriends a crow, a frog, to find someone that's similar to him. He made a short about a robot that tries to find love. Like Ed Scudder, ALONENTHEDARK was also very encouraging and would also give me some tips and guides when I asked or needed help on something. Littlefoot by Adam Phillips. So this is the last one I'll talk about. Adam Phillips is a legend when it comes to Flash animation. The quality and artistry of his work is always at a high level. The fact that it could play on my computer while it was browsing on my server was something to revel at back then. Like, I can't believe I'm playing this right now. And the Flash player, which is known to be super laggy, especially with underperforming PCs at the time. Thank God for YouTube. I might be wrong, but everything seen in his 2000s work was done entirely in Flash. Character animation, backgrounds, colors. He had a very good handle of the program, but also he had the artistry, the skills, the creativity. He just knew how to use it. Littlefoot was part of his Brackenwood world, where it starred this fawn-looking thing. It's basically known as a dashkin in the Brackenwood series. But everything that came from the Littlefoot world was always so mind-blowing. The world building was just so good. Adam Phillips already has experience as an FX animator. I think he also did character animation back in the day, even before Flash, so it shows when he utilizes those skills when it does come to animation, especially FX animation, something that he's already amazing at. So Littlefoot was a short that proved what you can do with Flash alone. And you guys should go check out his other work. He's been pushing that medium. He's been experimenting with game engines for his stuff. I have a feeling that he's also moved to ToonBoom, but he always made me want to do stuff in Flash. So these were the Flash animations that kind of inspired me to pursue film and animation. It was more so the Flash community that got me into learning about animation. It was that bridge that connected me to the things I wish I could do like animation, like that Disney stuff, anime, and made it possible to be done in something like Flash. Because of it, I started studying more of the Disney animation sensibilities. I started studying learning how to draw and finding other great animation work outside of Flash, really absorbing other types of inspiration I could that was related to animation, and how I could take those sensibilities into my own work. It's really sad that Adobe is ending its Flash player support by December 2020, and to me, that is basically the true end of an era. Back then when it was really underground, back then where there wasn't any social media clout or any monetization involved from as far as I know. We were just people just having fun, we had a lot of time in our hands, and we were just experimenting and having fun. We were just discovering things. We didn't really have any resources back then that told us this is how you do things and this is how it can only be done. But you know what, at times it is for the better too, because the Flash player was also a very faulty player. It wasn't necessarily good at compressing things. It's really hard just to have control when you're playing a short film. I remember having to just copy and paste some action script or some scripting language just to have a loading bar and a play button. Also, I too have sort of moved animation programs. I normally use TVPAINT and ToonBoom nowadays. Flash, or Adobe Animate, to me got worse. And it sucks because there's a lot of great things about it, but somehow Adobe isn't really showing any great support for that program. And now that the Flash player is ending its support, it truly is an end of an era. You can still make great work out of Flash in Adobe Animate, just saying. Maybe someday I'll show you guys all my old animation work in Flash during my high school days. Anyways, I want to thank the Newgrounds community for keeping all the old Flash cartoons that I used to love still up there and alive. And I want to thank all the people who have been a part of that Flash community and journey since way back. You guys are the true settlers when it came to the Wild West of web animation back in the day. And I'm glad to have been a part of it. So anyways, yeah, bye. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.